and we're talking what I'm sure will be RJ's all-time favorite new film, Salo, or 120 Days of Sodom, directed by Paolo Pasolini from 1975. I thought I'd begin by reading just the back of the Blu-ray box. The notorious final film from Pier Paolo Pasolini, Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, has been called nauseating, shocking, depraved, pornographic. It's also a masterpiece. The controversial poet, novelist, and filmmaker's transposition of the Marquis De Sade's 18th century opus of torture and degradation to fascist Italy in 1944 remains one of the most passionately debated films of all time. A thought-provoking inquiry into the political, social, and sexual dynamics that define the world we live in. So, I'll begin just with my own history with Salo. When I first started buying Criterions back in the early 2000s, this was basically the holy grail of the Criterion Collection. The reasons why was because at that point it was long out of print. Getting a copy of this on DVD at the time, it would probably cost you about $500 or $600 US.
Jesus.
Yeah, because no, it had been it came out in '98, so within like a short period of time, you couldn't get it anymore. So at that point, there was like your chances of getting it it was going to be a bootleg if you were going to get one. So like there was like whole web pages about like this is what a Salo bootleg looks like. It's got a white label and all this stuff like that. And second of all, why this film was so sought after is its reputation as being like the most filthy movie of like all the Criterion Collection and like all cinema history, only added to the interest that this movie had, I think, for people. So come October 2011, it was finally re-released on DVD and Blu-ray, which is what I have a copy of and what RJ borrowed. At this point, though, I had downloaded a copy. Because it was the only way I was going to ever see it, and I had never actually sat down and watched it in like a sitting. I'd only ever like perused it, skimming through it, just to be like, what's all this crazy dark shit that I've heard so much about? And I remember like kind of jumping around through it, and I always thought, oh, this kind of looks dull. And then like there'd be like some like butts and like weird like screaming and stuff like that, and people like moaning and stuff like that. I was just like, what is this? And so it just kind of like, I had a copy of it sat in my like folder on my computer for ages. But none of this stopped me from buying an official copy when it was finally available. And I sure ordered it. And it was March of 2012 when my two fellow ghouls, friends, and we sat down to see what all the hubbub was about. So that's kind of my preamble, I guess, of my experience with Salo.
Sure.
So first of all, what's Salo? Because I didn't actually ever stop and think what is Salo. I kind of like vaguely remembered like it's a place, right? So I read a little bit. So Salo, as far as like the context historically wise, it's the Italian Social Republic, informally known as the Republic of Salo, was a state with limited recognition that was created during the later part of World War II. It was the second and last incarnation of the fascist Italian state and was led by Mussolini and his reformed Republican Fascist Party. The state declared Rome as its capital, but was de facto centered in Salo, a small town on Lake Garda near Brescia, where Mussolini and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was headquartered. So let's just find my synopsis that I think is right off of IMDb. 4 fascist libertines round up 9 adolescent boys and girls and subject them to 120 days of physical, mental, and sexual torture. I think that says it all right there.
Yep.
So RJ, I'm just going to let you have at her at this point.
Oh, how nice of you. Well, I may surprise you with my answer here, Jarrett.
Oh.
This movie has the rare treat of being the absolute worst movie I've ever seen. I think. I don't know about worst, but this is probably the movie I will never, ever watch again. It's like at the bottom of my list. I don't get it. I don't understand how it got made. I don't understand why it got made. I see no artistic merit to it. I see no merit in the filming other than it has some nice looking sets. And frankly, I feel like the people who made this movie should be ashamed because I think it's horrible. So I don't know, man. I took a couple notes, and that was I don't doesn't even seem important anymore. It was like at the start. It's like at the start of the movie, I took some notes, and I was like, all right, all right. And then I'm not even gonna lie to you, man. Last night I was watching this. I had half an hour left, and I turned it off, and I was like, this might be the one I don't finish. I have a few movies that I have never finished, and a few that I have fast forwarded at the end just to say I have finished it. But for the show, I powered through and I watched the last half hour today.
Yep.
But I will admit, while the last half hour was playing, I was doing other things. I was not paying strict attention to it. So I got through it for the sake of the show, but it was with reluctance. And I will also say, last night I went to a birthday party for my aunt and I went to a Chinese restaurant. And I really just gorged myself, like, shamefully. My girlfriend looked at me like so upset that she's like in this relationship with someone who would do that at a restaurant. And then I came home and I ate so much. I was so sick on MSG, and I was like, how long is this fucking movie? And I was like, 2 hours. Oh my God. And I just felt like so sick in my stomach, and I was like tired from MSG, and I was like, I don't want to watch this fucking thing. And, I wish I didn't. So there you go, man. That's my glowing review of Salo. I wish I had never seen it.
Okay. How does it stack up with Walkabout for you?
So this is kind of a little bit of a challenge because it's way worse than Walkabout, I think. But Walkabout actually kills a bunch of animals in real life. So I don't know. Like, did they actually hurt some of these kids? Because they're kids, right? Like, they're not over 18, a lot of these people. It doesn't look like it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine that they're probably, like, at least older than 15 or over 16. But, I mean, I'd say some of them are, like, really, or they could just be really young looking. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, we're so used to, like, watching movies with teenagers where the teenagers in the movies are actually, like, 25 years old. 25, and they're, like, fully grown, like, adults, or, like, in that, so our perspective is kind of skewered. So, I don't know, like, I'd say that they're at least probably, like, because the film was never, like, held up for, like, obscenity law, or it was definitely held up for obscenity problems on its release, but it I don't think it was ever for, like, no one was concerned about the age of the actors in it. Okay. Yeah, so well, I don't think that was, like, so I mean, they were, like, they're 16 at least. Whatever the age would be in Italy, it wasn't an issue other than for the audience watching the movie. Yeah.
Okay, well, regardless, like, so
they were willing participants. I'm sure that they didn't I'm sure it was not a fun shoot, though.
Well, so, like, people know my opinion on Walkabout. Like, I don't like that movie either, but at least Walkabout has, like, a story. Like, I honestly, I don't know. Maybe I was so, like, Chinese food infused. I was just willfully blocking out this movie, but, like, I don't get it, man. Like, I don't understand what this fucking movie is supposed to be about. Like, I don't get it.
Okay. I'm gonna try. I once again, I find myself in a position where I have to defend, like, the indefensible in some ways.
You don't have to.
Well, I have to, though. I mean, that's kind of like that's like my place. I have to be a kind of the contrarian or whatever. At least, like, we have to have some sort of dialogue. We have to talk about this. Because I mean, because I knew, like, I was like, okay, so. Like I said, 4 years ago, I watched this movie. Let me go through my memories of it. I remember watching it at the time, and I thought, oh, that wasn't so bad. That was like, because at that point, I think we'd watched Martyrs, we'd watched a Serbian film. You name some of the stuff we've watched. We've watched it. We've got it covered. Like, we were, like, into, like, extreme cinema, like, as far as, like, narrative goes. And so, like, Salo was kind of like the last, like, one of the last markers on that road, and we watched it, and for the most part, it's like, oh, this movie's, like, way too well made to, like, be, like, written off as just, like, utter, like, trash, right? Like it's way too well made. Like the movie's like really well shot. No, it really is. Like those opening shots of like the like just desolate like Italy and the kids getting grabbed off the bikes basically and taken away. Those shots, like the layouts, like the opening titles, like that white background with the black text over it. Like I think those are beautiful. Like those are like some of the nicest titles. Like, and it's just simple things like that. The Ennio Morricone score, which I don't know if did you realize that was Morricone in the.
Yeah, I did. As soon as the movie started, I was like, this is way too nice to be in this movie. I'm not even kidding. That's the first note I have is this music's too good for this movie.
No. Oh yeah, no.
It also I felt like it was a Woody Allen movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, like Cannibal Holocaust, it has the same thing where it's got that beautiful, soothing music over like those opening credits, and it's like, oh, this is lulling me into like a false sense of security, because like that music is also like it's playing back to like music from like the 1920s, or like basically like music that Pasolini would have listened to when he was a kid. And I was checking out some of the interviews on the Blu-ray. And yeah, just like all these like benign things. Okay, so my experience with Salo, the first time I watched it was kind of like, that's not so bad. But I mean, to me, it's just like, yeah, this is definitely not a movie for everybody.
Yeah.
And so, okay, the next thing is like, so I haven't gone on my way to rewatch it. I don't know if I was ever really planning on rewatching it until we started doing this podcast. At which point I realized, oh, we're going to have quite the problem, because I'm pretty confident that RJ hasn't watched a lot of stuff like this, and I'm pretty sure he's going to hate it. And I mean, I don't blame anyone for hating this movie. I think that it's actually successful because you should hate it. Like I think that is completely the intent of Pasolini, to make something not a smooth film. And like, yeah, like your reaction should be kind of revolted. Like you should be repulsed by the things that you're seeing. So I watching the movie again. I was kind of like watching it for the second time and watching it, and I was kind of like, I was a little bit more bugged by stuff in it. I don't know if it's like I'm getting older and maybe more sensitive to stuff like that, but there's just like things where I was like, like, because I think like with my ghoul friends, like we could like laugh off some of the stuff that's happening in it, because it's just like you can almost roll your eyes at how how ghoulish it's trying to be.
Not when you're alone, though.
Well, when you're alone, you're kind of like there. You're confronted with everything. You're kind of experiencing it on this different level. Like if you saw it in a theater, like I couldn't even imagine watching this in the theater. You'd be like you'd be with a bunch of strangers probably, and be like a little like also like really off put, and like I couldn't imagine that being a ton of fun. So I guess like with the way I want to talk about this is I'll do kind of like a just talk about like kind of the important figures involved in this movie. So starting with Pasolini himself, because I imagine you probably don't know very much about him at all. Okay, so he was born in 1922, and by the way, RJ, were you aware that this is the first director in our Criterion Creep that was murdered?
Oh, you don't say.
And he was.
Was it related to the release of the movie?
Well, he was murdered the year this movie came out.
Huh.
Yeah. Would you like me to go into that detail, or would you like me to tell about his biographical information a little bit first?
I know you're just going to do whatever you want anyway, so just do it. Okay.
So he was an Italian director, poet, intellectual figure. He was a member, or I guess like he was involved with the Italian Communist Party. He was openly gay, but also he was Catholic minded. Like he did, like he was aware of, he was raised Catholic and whatnot. So I guess the problem with him growing up and living sort of through World War II and like that sort of post World War II Italy was that, so he was a communist, which wasn't popular to be. He was gay, which was just not popular to be at all in that period of time. But as a communist, he also wanted to like kind of infuse Christian ideals into it, which is kind of not, is the antithesis to communism, which is generally like atheistic in its approach. So he wasn't really popular amongst anybody. Right. Because he was like a free thinker, I suppose. So I mean, like he had problems where like, you know, people would be able to like trump up charges against him for like corrupting minors, and like there'd be accusations that he's like sleeping with young men and corrupting them and whatnot. And so I mean he was like avoiding jail. He was never actually convicted of anything, but it seemed like it was more of like a tool to use against him to kind of get him out of the way. So by the 1950, he was living in poverty and squalor with his mother, kind of like just like in rural Italy. By the mid 50s, so I mean at this point we're talking he's like 30 or so, he started getting a career together, I guess, working in the literary section for Italian state radio, but then he wrote a book with the English title of Hustlers that was very poorly received by the establishment, and obscenity lawsuits followed him. So I mean, at some point, I mean, this is like me going off of Wikipedia. I'm no Pasolini scholar. He started getting involved with film. He started actually being involved with script writing and writing dialogue on Fellini films. He wrote some dialogue for Knights of Cabiria, as well as dialogue in La Dolce Vita. And then so come the 60s, he actually starts making his own films. Let's just see here. I'm not really comfortable enough to really start discussing the politics of Italy through the 60s, but I think you could imagine that no matter what was happening, Pasolini found himself at odds with the times. During all his life, Pasolini was frequently entangled in lawsuits filed against him, up to 33, variously charged with public disgrace, foul language, obscenity, pornography, contempt of religion, contempt of the state, etc., for which he was always eventually acquitted. During the 1968 protests in Rome, which was like basically the year of protests all over like the Western world, Pasolini was actually on the side of the police who were fighting against the guerrilla-like uprising of university students. He didn't see the police as evil, but he saw the actual police officers making up the rank and file as like proletariat in that communist mindset, and that should be something the police should, or the communists should be in favor of. That like the true like power that they're fighting against is from like the judiciary and the judges, like the ruling class themselves, rather than the police. And then, I mean, so you have to consider Pasolini as a transgressive figure. His mindset not so far off from the Marquis de Sade, who I will talk about. I mean, he's a guy who was always challenging the system as it existed. And I mean, as this like kind of like communist gay man living in this sort of like brutish like society or whatever. I mean, he was making these movies. Like, I mean, like, Salo was sort of like a complete turnaround of everything he was making up to that point. Like one of his like probably there's actually a future Criterion Creep way down the road. He has this trilogy of life, which are they're three. They're not like this at all. There's three of them. They're adaptations of like of Arabian Nights, Canterbury Tales, and the Decameron, and I've watched them. And like there's like, I mean, there's definitely like he's got a very different approach to like the sort of films that he makes, and but they're like Salo, he intentionally set out to make what Salo was, and that's because he chose the Marquis de Sade's like most like infamous book that he ever made, which was the 120 Days of Sodom. And then like also, I mean, so he selects that particular work, and he also kind of brings into this like the Dante's Divine Comedy aspect, like the Inferno, the circles that he talks about, or in the film, those are in reference to like the levels of hell, and each level gets progressively worse. And I mean, Dante was an Italian poet like from the 1300s who was like writing in like those works were engaging in a criticism of like ruling classes. And so I mean, like once again, you have this like thing where you have like Dante, you have Pasolini, and you have Marquis de Sade, kind of like both working in these like different ways, kind of challenging like the ruling class structure. So that's kind of the framework I guess Pasolini was working in. So I'm going to talk about his murder, because that's like the real trash, the real trashy shit. So a squad car stopped a speeding Alfa Romeo near Rome. The driver, Giuseppe Pino Pelosi, a 17-year-old hustler, tried to run but was arrested for theft of the car, which was Pasolini's. 2 hours later, the director's body was discovered. Pasolini was murdered by being run over several times with his own car, dying on November 2nd, 1975, on the beach of Ostia. Multiple bones had been broken and his testicles crushed by what appeared to be a metal bar. His body had been partially burned, the autopsy report revealed, by gasoline after the point of death. It has long been considered to have been a mafia-style revenge killing, extremely unlikely for one person to have carried out. Pelosi, who was the one arrested with the stolen car, confessed. Pasolini had picked him up and they ate a meal at a restaurant. The director knew. where he was known. Pino ate spaghetti with oil and garlic. Pasolini drank a beer. At 11:30 p.m., they drove towards Ostia, where Pasolini asked something I did not want, to sodomize the boy with a wooden stick. Pelosi refused. Pasolini struck. Pelosi ran, picked up 2 pieces of table, seized the stick, and battered Pasolini to death. As he escaped in the car, he ran over what he thought was a bump in the road. I killed Pasolini, he told his cellmate and the police. Pelosi was convicted in 1976 with unknown others. 29 years later, on May 2005, Pelosi retracted his confession, which he said had been made under the threat of violence to his family. He claimed that 3 people with a southern accent had committed the murder, insulting Pasolini as a dirty communist. Other evidence uncovered in 2005 pointed to Pasolini having been murdered by an extortionist. Testimony by Pasolini's friend Sergio Citti indicated that some of the rolls of film from Salo had been stolen and that Pasolini had been going to meet with the thieves after a visit to Stockholm in 1975. Despite the Roman police's reopening of the murder case following Pelosi's statement of May 2005, the judge's charge with investigating it determined the new elements insufficient for them to continue the inquiry. So yeah, our first murder victim on the podcast.
Jarrett, maybe he had it coming.
Maybe. So let's talk a little bit about Marquis De Sade. He's he's kind of like I realized you had no idea who he was. I guess.
Nope.
I
still don't think I know who that guy is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, born 1740 and died in 1814, the Marquis de Sade was a French aristocrat, revolutionary politician, philosopher, and writer, famous for espousing the libertine philosophy, known for his erotic works, which were pornographic, depicting sexual fantasies, with an emphasis on violence, criminality, and blasphemy against the Catholic Church. His name is actually from which sadism and sadists derive. 32 years of his life were spent in institutions, from various prisons to an insane asylum. So yeah, no, he is like where the word sadism comes from.
Okay.
So he's the root of that.
Great.
Are you familiar with like what libertines are? Like yeah. Okay. So from reading about his exploits, it's hard to come away with thinking that De Sade was anything but a real degenerate who is, with his wealth, was able to get away with all sorts of sick fuckery. One particular story, a widow beggar approached him for alms and he hired her as a housekeeper. Once they got back to his place, though, she gets the De Sade treatment, including whippings, incisions, hot wax, and general beatings. Because this is, of course, after he tied her down. She escaped. Great. There was some non-lethal poisoning of prostitutes and sodomy with his manservant Latour. They were sentenced in absentia and they were on the run. They, went down to Italy while evading, French police. A lot of this is, of course, alleged and after the fact kind of information, as far as I could tell. I mean, who knows, like, what was real or not. Sure. But I like to think that it's probably not too off from what actually happened. For his time, he was basically like an early communist in his thinking, like, because I mean, he came up in the French Revolution or like during that period of time, but I mean, he was also an aristocrat. So, I mean, like, he wouldn't be very popular in that group, other than the fact that he espoused these views or shared certain things. He was completely opposed to the right to property, and it was like the crown, the bourgeoisie, the aristocracy, and the clergy together who were against the poor, which, I mean, if you look at 120 Days of Sodom, your 4 villains, I guess, there are those figures. So, I mean, he's kind of become a important figure in a lot of like 20th century academic writing. I mean, people view his notions of what freedom were and like his like nihilism, his existentialism, like, which people like can say, wow, he's really ahead of his time. But I mean, you can, if you do that, like, you're kind of, I mean, but I mean, you could also count like Ian Brady, one of the duo who were behind the Moors murders. Apparently he was a big fan of Marquis de Sade's stuff.
Of course he was.
Of course he was. And I mean, probably the most recent and accessible place, probably, if one was interested in learning more about the Marquis de Sade, I guess, would be to watch the film Quill starring Jeffrey Rush from 2000. But that film is like kind of like this sort of like weird thing that I've noticed like in kind of cultural Marxism or like kind of your left-wing academic writing, is that they kind of like have whitewashed like the darkness of De Sade and like kind of say, well, no, he was like a literary freedom fighter who was a martyr to the cause of free expression.
Great.
So
great.
Yeah. So about the 120 Days of Sodom book itself. So it was written in 1785. And it's actually, the film itself is a fairly faithful recreation in itself. Though, I mean, the scale of the book is obviously like larger in some ways. Like there's 46 victims. And there's like far more like like the murder section, that last half hour you were in and out of the room for. Pasolini actually shows a lot of restraint in not depicting everything described in like the De Sade book. It's like, if you want to know, you can check Wikipedia and read that entry. It's pretty like monstrous stuff. Is
this book still in print?
Okay, so I'll get about its printing history. So the book, like, it never was published, right? So because he wrote this in prison. He wrote this in the Bastille. Because at this point, like, he was already tossed into jail for like all his like crimes against people, and like people just like finding like being a blasphemer and stuff like that, which like was a much bigger deal like in the 1700s than it is now.
But it's probably good they got him anyways.
Well, fuck, I mean, like, yeah, if there's serious like this thing where it's like he's like kidnapping women or hiring women and just like torturing them, it's like, well, they signed up, they had a choice. It's like, yeah, they were also poor people that like you're the rich guy paying them and they're going to go along with whatever you can do. It's like, yeah, that's fine, I guess, but like what? I
think signing up for stuff has a different meaning from now and 350 years ago.
Yeah. So the book went unpublished until the early 20th century, and this book continues to be still banned by governments to this day. So he wrote this book in 37 days while imprisoned. He wrote it out on tiny bits of paper that he glued together, creating a 39-foot roll. He wrote it very tinily. When the Bastille was stormed in 1789, 4 years later, he thought it was lost, but I guess he had done a good enough job hiding it behind walls in his cell. Because then it was, I'm not sure exactly what the history of it is, but it was uncovered, and it kind of just lingered until it was actually published by a Berlin psychiatrist in 1904. So the first time this actually became like readable to people was like almost like 150 years after the fact.
Right.
Or God.
What was the reception of
100 years?
Book?
Well. It's utter filth, right? Like that's like kind of the whole thing. I mean, it's this like degenerate dude's like masturbatory material. I mean, he wrote this stuff out and like just like depicting like the darkest side of humanity. Like, because like the whole idea, like during like the French Revolution, there was like this idea of like I think it's Rousseau, like this idea of like the goodness, the intrinsic goodness of humans and people. Yeah. And so this is like him saying, no. This is like the worst of humanity, and I'm going to write like this book to that, and it's going to be like everything I could possibly imagine, the darkest, filthiest thing that like runs contrary to every humanist idea you have, and that's like what this book kind of represents.
So I get that because I share a lot of the same sentiments, but at the same time, just because I also think some of those things doesn't mean I enjoy. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, continue.
Old Marquis de Sade, he himself described his work as the most impure tale that has ever been told since our world began.
Well, I don't know, man. Has he read any of those Harry Potter books? Because some people have a real problem with those. Not me. I like those, but some people do.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's people who have problems with Halloween costumes too, and like, decorations or creepers. Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, this is the thing though. Like, I guess I was kind of surprised that you had no idea who Marquis de Sade was, because like made me start thinking like, well, you're not like this ignorant person, and I'm like, well, I wonder how many people out there have no idea who this figure is or was. Like they have no concept of it. It's not like it's being taught in school. Actually, one of the things I read was like described as like de Sade's like one of the most famous and like least read writers that exist. Like people like the reputation of this stuff precedes itself. I mean, people know what a sadist is, they know what sadism is, but they don't know that that was a guy. Like, and there's like a reason why that comes from that and is defined the way that it is. But yeah, no, I mean, like there's been like countless occasions where like this work has been like attempted to be destroyed. Napoleon Bonaparte, like he was like the last guy that had because De Sade also wrote Justine, another one of his works, and I mean Napoleon had him arrested and he was thrown in jail, and that's where he spent the rest of his days, locked up.
Good for him. Napoleon Dynamite, right?
Yeah, Napoleon Dynamite himself. With his time machine. Yeah. So, what more can I ramble on here about? Do you have any thoughts?
Not really. Like I'll say that I was a little bit over enthusiastic in my intro. So like the point or what I was saying with you too is like I honestly like I agree with this guy. You know, people do suck. Like, and people will do horrible fucking things. Like I completely believe that. Like, just go look at just go read your paper or read or watch the news that day. See how horrible people can be. But it goes to the point though where it's like I said, just because I do share some of the beliefs doesn't mean that it seems like he encourages it, which I don't know if he does. Like, I mean, you can't ask him. Dude's been dead for 400 fucking years, but like, I don't know. Just because I think it, I don't want to bask in it. Also, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. And so, okay, this is
so
where
that's why I don't like it.
Okay, so this is where I guess I find the film worth discussing and why I think it is art or whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
Even if you don't like it, I guess.
Yeah.
So, because so Pasolini made this film, and I mean, he like depicts all these acts that I'm pretty sure that De Sade probably was like masturbating about when he was thinking about this stuff. I don't think Pasolini was. He presents all this as cold and calculated as possible. He presents the degradation and the awfulness as clinically as possible. Like, it's just like matter of fact. Like those, like the way he shoots things from a distance. Like there's like everything's like from afar, and like there's no like I don't think you're supposed to enjoy it at all. But he's depicting it like honestly and like kind of like and just like this is what it is. 'Cause I mean like like the sets, the clothing that like people are wearing, like the basically the horrors that
Trousers.
are telling their stories. Like they're like there's like those gowns and outfits they're wearing. Those things are amazing. Like they're just like incredibly designed, and it's like so like a lot of thought went into this. It wasn't like just this kind of like tossed off like piece of like exploitation trash. Like it's I think it inspired a lot of exploitation trash after the fact probably. Well actually one of the reasons why Pasolini went this direction was because his trilogy of life movies, like those like were kind of like these more pastoral films that had like kind of like genuine depictions of sex in them. And basically what happened in Italy was that was like a sign to like the Italian like film industries, like, hey, we should make movies like those Pasolini movies, but we'll like make them like sexier. And they just start turning into porn, and he was just getting pissed because it's like they're kind of like usurping what he was doing with these stories and turning them into a product rather than like art, I guess. Because I doubt he was like really engaged with like the film, like the money side of the film industry. Like so I mean, he made Salo, which is like kind of like the most unconsumable thing you could imagine. And I mean, I think there was like some bit I read too where like his like one of those things that sometimes artists will say, kind of like the coprophagia scenes in Salo as a comment on the processed food industry or something like that. And like like something like that, like someone will like come up with that, and I'm like, I don't know if that's exactly where he was thinking, but people like saying things like that, don't they?
People sure do.
Yeah. So, okay, if you again, one thing I thought I would read was there's a really good essay. There's like a big book that comes with this Blu-ray, and it's actually the first essay that was written for the 1998 release by, I think it's John Powers. And he wrote it, and I think I'll read it in its entirety because I think it's like really good, and I think it's like the best thing I've read about Salo. And I'm just going to read it. So you got to listen. On November 2nd, 1975, the Italian director Pier Paolo Pasolini was found dead, murdered, police said, by a young male prostitute. However lurid its details, the Roman tabloids ran huge front-page photos of the disfigured corpse. His death struck many as metaphorically apt, and not only because of Pasolini's known taste for rough trade. He had long had a crush on the idea of flamboyant death. Painter, poet, and novelist, essayist, filmmaker, semiotician, gay icon, renegade Marxist, public controversialist, champion of both outlaw sexuality and of a mythic view of life he termed epic religious, Pasolini was not only Italy's most important post-war intellectual, but also a quintessential 20th century type, self-indulgent and self-despising, never sure whether to blame himself or the world for his inescapable alienation. Never keeping to one style for long, his cinematic career carried him from his gritty early 60s films about pimps and thieves in the Borgate, the impoverished shantytown wasteland that circled Rome, to his popular 70s trilogy of life, which seemed the work of a bawdy, life-affirming man. The happy perception suggested by the trilogy was changed forever by his final film, Salo, a one-of-a-kind project that takes no little defending and may indeed be indefensible. It's the cruelest, most obscene, and most intellectually toxic work ever made by a major director. Once seen, it is forever remembered. Pasolini began the film during a period of enormous artistic crisis, filled with disappointment in man and God, as one of his friends described it. He began to think that all his earlier work was bogus and compromised, merely another length of the feed tube through which consumerist repression is shoved down our throats. His response was to make what he called an indigestible film based on the Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom, with a smidge of Dante's Inferno thrown in. Set in Italy during the waning days of World War II, Salo tells the story of four debauched fascists who retreat to a chateau and begin using innocence to satisfy their basest desires. Beginning with mere violation in the circle of obsessions, sodomy is favored. They move on to the circle of shit, people forced to eat their own feces, before reaching the circle of blood, in which skulls are smashed, eyeballs sliced, and victims ritualistically slaughtered. Salo is one of the handful of genuinely disturbing movies ever made. It leaves you shaken, not simply because of what it is depicting, but also because of how. Pasolini presents the most vicious debasement in a highly formalized style that's as coolly dispassionate as a geometric proof. There's no room in this death-eating film for human decency or affirmation. A heterosexual couple is murdered merely for being heterosexual, yet homosexuality is also portrayed as a form of tyranny. A cinematic ground zero, Salo confirms the cruel meaninglessness of everything human. Life is reduced to impersonal fornications, eating and defecating, the inescapable power of hawks over sparrows, with no hope of transcendence or redemption. Sparrows can only hope to become hawks. In what is probably the most savage twist, Pasolini implies that watching this movie makes one complicit in its horrific world. Our own voyeurism is inescapably guilty. At the end, we witness the ritual murder of innocents through reverse binoculars, a distancing process that frees us from the sound of their screams and lets us enjoy the moment with proper detachment. There's never been a stronger attack on the deathly voyeurism lurking in the experience of art, Pasolini's and our own. With such a bleak work for his artistic testament, it's small wonder that many people saw Pasolini's own murder as Salo's real-life climax. Nor was it surprising that such a film would divide critics and audiences. It was assailed by, among countless others, worldly men such as novelist Italo Calvino, who saw it in evidence of the filmmaker's personal corruption, and Richard Roud, the late director of the New York Film Festival, who wrote, "It is a terminal film in every sense of the word." Yet, if Salo is not a simple or likable movie, it does have a terrible kind of grandeur, and this grandeur is inseparable from its assault on all our most cherished moral beliefs. In an interview with French television before its premiere, Pasolini explained the aesthetic principle behind the film. "I believe to give scandal is a duty, to be scandalized a pleasure, and to refuse to be scandalized is moralism." At a time when movies are routinely shocking and controversial, Salo not only lives up to these words, but makes them feel childlessly inadequate. Ta-da!
Great. I have two comments.
Yes.
What did he say? Something ground zero?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting. I can't remember what I wanted to say about that now. Doesn't matter. I was going to say that whole talk about voyeurism, maybe the Peeper Creeper lady hasn't seen this movie. Maybe someone should send her a copy. And that'll really ramp her up.
Then you'd get busted for some sort of hate crime or something.
Oh, well, yeah, but I won't label it. And I'll sprinkle it with flowers so they can't find my fingerprints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, what were your notes on this film? You mentioned you had some notes, but I'm just curious what you had.
So I did take notes, but as I said, I think about half an hour in, I abandoned that. My first note was on the music, like I said, with Woody Allen. And then my second note was, how old are the dinks that we're seeing here? Because I had a question about the age of the actors. And then I wrote, there was a line, someone said, orgy room for story time.
Yep.
Which I thought was funny until I saw it. Then one of the guys asked the lead whore a question, and she dances instead of before she answers.
Yes.
So I was going to ask you if you've ever answered a question by dance.
With dance? I can't recall.
Okay. And then I have one note. It just says guy goes around room kissing everyone. Mm-hmm. So I guess that happened at one point.
Yep.
And then a quote here that says nothing's more contagious than evil. And that's where I stopped taking notes.
Yep. I think that is sort of that's the jumping off point. And then it just sort of turns into what it is.
Yeah, I think I stopped before all the poop stuff. But yeah, I think I gave it an honest shot for like 20 minutes.
Yep.
And then I was just like, nah, nope. I was like, I'll watch it and I'll talk about it like that, but I don't need to put anything else down into detail here. So
very well. I think one of the things that like I still like one of the things I really remembered was I can't remember which member of the four bastard people it is, but the one that's like offers up his ass to be sodomized at dinner.
It's the googly-eyed guy.
Yeah. He like in his like face of just like, oh boy, it's my turn. Like there was like moments like where they participate and then it's like, oh, I'm gonna get down on this, I'm gonna get on this deflowering business, and then like the other guy's like, oh, I'm gonna take advantage of this guy, and it's like, oh, they're all game. And just like the scenes with just like the whole idea that like, oh, we have to like unite and we have to like make sure that we hold true to what we're doing here, so we're gonna marry one another's daughters off, and they're gonna get to participate in all this fun. Yep.
Yep. That's all I gotta say is yep.
Okay, so I thought I would throw out who loves this film.
I was actually gonna suggest this to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
So director Michael Haneke named the film his fourth favorite film, or top fourth film or whatever, for the 2002 Sight and Sound poll. There's Catherine Breland, who she's directed some Criterions we'll get to. One film in particular, Fat Girl, you're just going to love too.
Oh, God.
She actually wrote an essay for this release. She's I mean, no one's a fan of this movie, I don't think. Okay, I'll talk about that. Comedian David Cross.
No, not Tobias.
Tobias loves it. Rainer Werner Fassbinder, they're all big fans, and John Waters, who I've always like. I'm expecting soon that John Waters will have a addition to the Criterion Collection, and that'll be great because that means you'll get to watch a John Waters movie finally. Because like basically, if you don't like Salo, you are definitely going to not like Pink Flamingos. Yeah, that's kind of like that's next on that's like the RJ like greats list, because that movie not only is utterly debased, but it also has some good old fashioned animal cruelty. So it has both. But he says about Salo is a beautiful film. It uses obscenity in an intelligent way, and it's about the pornography of power. There you have it.
Okay.
So who hates Salo? I wrote lots of people probably.
Okay, wait. Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Sorry,
go.
I blanked for a second. So I also looked at the people who love this movie.
Yes.
I looked at the top 5 or 6 comments there, and basically what I gathered from all of it were 4 out of the 6. They said, I don't know why this is my favorite movie, or I can't bring myself to tell people that this is one of my favorite movies. And then most of them just talk about how it's the technical merits of it or the satire of it or something like that. And I kind of feel like all that is just bullshit.
Okay.
And it's just these people just really, really dig this stuff, but they're too ashamed to, or they just don't want to publicly say that.
Okay. Well, yeah. So when I was looking at so first I'll start. TV Guide gave the film a mixed review. They give it a 2.5 out of 4. Despite moments of undeniably brilliant insight, is nearly unwatchable, extremely disturbing, and often literally nauseous. I also saw that Roger Ebert owned a copy of this since it came out on Laserdisc. He never watched it, citing its transgressive reputation put him off watching it. So I guess he got off never having to watch that movie probably.
Good for him.
Yeah, hopefully he didn't spend his last couple years, in the state that he was in, and he's like, oh, I guess I should get Salo out of the way. Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Well, he did love Happiness though, so.
Hey, come on.
So maybe he would have loved Salo.
Hey, Happiness is fun. That's a fun movie, RJ. Come on.
Nobody would describe it like that.
Oh, I do. I genuinely do.
Yeah, but you're a genuine monster.
Then RJ, the next time you watch that movie, the humor will start coming through.
I'm never gonna watch that movie again. I'm gonna start a list of movies Jarrett made me watch that I will never watch again.
Yeah,
I can already put in at least 5 or 6.
Well, I know. Let's see. There's Happiness, Gummo,
and Salo.
Is Martyrs? Because I know that's one that you've never actually given a star rating to.
I can't bring myself to do it, but no, I don't think I would put that one in there.
Okay.
That movie is actually, we'll talk about it on Ghoul School.
Ghoul School. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't even know really if it is necessary to delve into like people's hatred of this movie, because when I started doing that, I started looking, and like there's so many people who never even bothered giving this movie a star rating. Like they just gave it no star rating and just said like, fuck this movie, I hate this movie. Which are
just like me.
I guess I mean, to me, those are like sane responses, honestly. Yeah. Like I don't really question why someone would not like this movie. Like it doesn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah.
Because I mean, okay, unlike any film we've watched, like people don't just hate this movie because they don't like action movies. It's not they found it boring. They didn't think it was like a waste of their time, or like this is aged badly. They're actually angry that this movie exists and that like they watched it. Like they're just mad that this thing is like a thing, and like it's just because it's so confrontational. But I mean, like I think the funniest thing I read amongst the like the letterbox comments I was reading was that the film lacked character development.
Really?
Yeah.
That's what they took away.
This movie lacked character development. It's like, well, if it had some of that, I would have been okay with the rest of it.
If the googly-eyed guy developed a little bit more, I think it would have been better. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they should have like given them some backstory. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Okay. So I mean, the criticism of what this movie is. I mean, I think you can easily explain why it should exist, and it does exist, and so it's there, right? It was made. You can't unmake it, so it's a movie that's there. And it's not like I don't think people are accidentally going to ever stumble across this movie unless it pops up on Netflix, which would be hilarious to me. Actually, because there's like the one movie, The Beast. It's the one French or Polish movie that Arrow put out, and it's just a porno with a beast monster with a giant cock, and it shoots out like shampoo-looking cum. And this thing is on Netflix in Canada right now. Last I checked. And this movie, it's amazing to me that this thing is there. That movie is ridiculous.
I'm going to look into this while you're talking.
You're going to ignore me? I'm trying to convince
you. No,
I'm
trying
to convince you. Okay, so it is always going to wind up being a sort of threshold movie for many people. Like, that's what it always was in my mind. This is the movie, it's like, you want to watch hardcore, buddy? You watch Salo. Okay. I think intellectually this could be considered someone's best film, but I don't think anyone could feel this is one of their favorite films, as there are just like too many truly great movies that resonate on a far more positive level, that like offer like a visceral emotional response rather than like this film, which I think only offers like an abject, distant disgust. So I mean, like, I just couldn't see anyone being like, "Oh yeah, it's like my favorite movie." Like, it just, to me, it's like, well, I don't think you understand the question I'm asking, I suppose. I mean, for me, like the shot that sticks with me the most, that I think is really amazing, is the shot of the girl defiantly looking at the girl from across from her at the dinner table as she chomps down on her fork that's got a big piece of shit on it, and she just wolfs it down, and she's like giving it a go. I'm going to eat this, and then she just like gags on it. And it's like, I think that says it all about Salo. Like, this movie is that is what this movie is. It's like, I feel like I'm that girl, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take this in. And it's like, still, it's revolting, because it is. I mean, as much as you think you can take it, it's not meant to be consumed. In the context of what Pasolini's goals were, as laid out in that Powers essay, this is exactly the kind of film he wanted to make. It was a rejection of making something that was like imitatable, and so he offers up like the darkest, most irredeemable object that no one would want anything to do with beyond, like, this is the ultimate statement of the horror of humanity, of power. This is what power does to people. This is what happens to peasants and poor people. It is going to be unenjoyable because none of these things should be enjoyed unless its intention is to make something consumable. So, I mean, like, when I think about like people's like top 200 movie lists and stuff like that you see all the time, all those movies kind of offer similar experiences. Yeah, this doesn't offer that. This movie doesn't offer like a escape. It's not pleasing. I mean, it's not like something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. See, that movie, to me, it's like one of those movies, like, I really like that movie for like so many reasons, and it's like it doesn't like it's such a well crafted, great movie, but it's like I couldn't think of a movie that's more the opposite of Salo. Like, it's just like it's on such a different level. But I mean, I don't love Salo. I think Salo is like one of those movies that like I think I give it like 3 stars, and to me that's like one of those things where I'm like, well, I admire that it exists. I mean, I've rewatched it at this point, and I mean, if someone asked me, "Hey, well, how's this Salo movie go?" Like, I would talk about it. I could explain it and be like, "Well, this is what you're getting yourself into." I mean, so I watched the one. There's one of the documentaries on the Blu-ray too. There's an interview with Pasolini from like during the production of this, and like so you see footage of Pasolini like with the camera in that like final scene where like people are like simulating being tortured and killed in the back, but then you just see this guy with a camera and he's just filming this, and you're like, right, this is still just a movie that he's making, and he's like made all these decisions to like depict these horrible debased things that are like irredeemable in real life, but he's making this movie about it, and I don't know, he seemed like a really cool guy. Like he's just like super thoughtful and like just completely, I don't know, doing something completely different than what anyone else was doing. And I mean, no one else is going to make this movie. People don't make movies like this, and they try to make stuff like this, and it's always like, I mean, something like a Serbian film, it's just like a Brian De Palma movie where it's like, oh, it's just like thrills and disgust, and it's like, so I mean, it's like not even on the same level or page.
Hey Jarrett, you know someone else who was doing things that no one else was doing?
Who? Hey, it's our first Hitler reference on the show.
Well, it was bound to happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he too was unconventional, and people had issue with it. I guess I hear.
So I've heard. Yeah. So okay. Well, hey, this movie's like kind of about Mussolini, and they were buds.
Yeah. I think they were like acquaintances.
Yeah.
Like they were like saw each other at a party and be like, oh, there's Mussolini, I gotta go say hi.
Right. Oh, so actually, it's maybe fitting to bring up old Hitler. So because there's also that movie I watched like this year, that Son of Saul, where like that movie is not a good time, but it's like I think it's pleasant enough made, I guess, that you can watch it as a movie and people can be like, wow, that movie really moved me and like it made me feel a particular way. Whereas I think Salo just like it's a movie about like. It's based on this book that's about like a depiction of like the darkest side of humanity that you're not going to get anywhere else. I mean, the closest thing I could compare it to is there's this one author who's like describes himself as a true crime writer. His name's Peter Sodos, and I mean I've read his writings, and it's like the most disturbing stuff I've ever read. And I've like gone out of my way to read a lot of stuff. He's on a different level. That's kind of like he's the only one of the few people that it like is around that is like even in the same remote place. If that sounds something appealing to you listeners, you can just look him up because I won't get too much into Peter Sodos, but he's a guy that if you like really are interested in Salo and actually like the film strongly, Peter Sodos might be offering something you might be into. So RJ, don't read Peter Sodos books.
I think you should make a list of all the stuff that you like, stuff like that, so I can just know to avoid it.
Right.
And don't be pulling any of those tricks like with Happiness and Gummo. Oh, sure, you'll love these movies.
Well, you should.
Well, I don't know, man. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm the monster.
Yeah.
Maybe
you were the.
Maybe that's. Yeah.
Well, it's like it's like the last line in Cannibal Holocaust. Who are the real cannibals?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was gonna say all I know is that I don't want the professor, the lizard from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies coming over to my house.
Oh.
And it's so Happiness and
Dylan
things
Baker
like that. Yeah. So that guy's ruined forever. So. All those kids watching Spider-Man, they're like, "Oh, it's the lizard."
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh yeah, well, hey kids." I don't know what I'm getting at.
Right. So
whatever.
At the end of the day, RJ, you are completely correct in what you're thinking, and I continue to struggle with, I guess, defending the existence of Salo.
So,
but guess what? Criterion agrees with me.
Criterion's full of shit. And
Fuck
if you're
those guys.
If you're listening out there, you know it too.
Yeah. Well, I think that does her. After the break, we're going to give us some pitches. RJ's got some pitches for all you folks about the next hot idea that's going to take Hollywood by storm.
The Rock is a little Hawaiian girl.